everybody. Welcome to the Apocrypha Apocalypse. I am Gary Michuta, and it is time for yet another chill stream here on the Apocrypha Apocalypse. Hope everybody's doing well. And yes, it is a chill stream. It's 3:33 here in the Detroit area, very early. Hence, that is why I'm speaking in subdued tones because I don't want to wake up everybody in my house. But I'm thrilled and pumped to be with you today, continuing our series on Jerome. Really important stuff. And I'm glad you're with me, as always. So, hope everybody's doing well. I had a really cool stream, only an hour and a half, I think it was, with David Zavaris yesterday. Fortunately, we actually had, I think, a Protestant who showed up at the stream and gunning for us in the chat room. But unfortunately, because of the shortened length, we really weren't able to address some of his, I don't know what you would say, jabs that he would make, which is too bad. I was really going to, I'm really going to have some fun with him, but time ran out. So anyway, I hope he comes back. It was a good stream, lots of great questions. Had Orthodox Philip on, had Gary 2 on, and it was a party, as always. And I hope you're having a party today. It is Wednesday, believe it or not. I had to look to see whether it was Wednesday. Just been crazy stuff here. And anyway, I want to welcome all of you to the show. So, yes, I know, James. Thank you very much. I actually apologized on the team stream yesterday, and I'll apologize here today because I was really tired the other day. Didn't get very much sleep. I had to drive my daughter to ER and other things too. It just worked out. I think I had 3 hours sleep when I did the live stream yesterday, and which is no excuse. I should know to click that this is for adults, not children's programming. And as you guys know, YouTube defaults to that mode. And when it does, that means it turns off the chat room. And what fools me is it doesn't do it immediately, because if it did it immediately, I would know something's wrong. But instead, it allowed the chats to continue for a while, and then it cut off everything. So I'm doing the program, reading the chats, and it's like, well, I guess no one's chatting. So I just assumed I put everybody to sleep and continued on with the program, failing to realize that I didn't put the toggle switch on the right mode. And so I excluded you guys, which was a real bummer. I have to say, I was kind of depressed after the program. Then when I was putting the PowerPoint up on Patreon, I realized what I did, but by then it was too late. So my sincere apologies to everybody. I missed you guys, and that was totally my fault. So mea culpa, mea maximal culpa. Anyway, Justified Janice is in the house. Janice, hope you're doing great. It's always good to see you. One of our regulars. Lino as well. Lino, powerhouse of information. So is Janice. So is everybody. I'm always so humbled by you guys. I was telling Dr. David after the show yesterday how amazing you guys are. It's like this is a think tank here. And just the fact that all of you are doing your own research and digging in and finding things and making arguments stronger. And it's humbling. It really is. And so I'm thrilled and pumped not only to be here, but very humbled as well that you're in the chat room with me. It's scary, but it's also very reassuring because I know if I slip up, you guys have my back. Hollywood Big Boss. Hey, yo. Thrilled and pumped, and I am too. Everybody here is psyched, thrilled and pumped and ready to go. Oh, yeah. There's so much to cover, guys. Jerome, I was sorry. My apologies. I was a few minutes late. But however, you know what? I found out that if I start by putting the thumbnail up and then going to the countdown roll, I found that the transitions are a lot smoother and it looks better on on YouTube, and it also gives me a couple seconds to make some last-second adjustments. As always, StreamYard, because the PDFs are so huge, it takes a long time for it to crunch. So I'm like, it's literally compiling the PDF for the whatever format it uses internally while I'm doing the introduction. So I'm trying to string it out so I can be on time, have the live go, and have everything ready for you just in case something goes wrong. So yeah, you'll see the thumbnail pop up when I'm live, and then I'll do the rolls. But I appreciate your patience because there's a lot of details. I'm trying to make this the best presentation I possibly can. And with Jerome, it's like there's just so much. I really need to thin this out. But it's still fun just to hang out with you and go through this. Richard, hey, welcome aboard. God bless you as well. Yeah, James, that same as the other one. Thank you for the super chat, James. Happy feast of angelic doctor. The secret word is angel today. So here you go. There you go. Feast of angelic doctor. Why not angel? Thank you for putting that up, James. I was at a loss yesterday to come up with a secret word when I thought no one. I actually thought, because I was operating on incredibly reduced steam, mentally speaking, yesterday or the other chill stream, I thought I'd put everybody to sleep, honestly. It was a lot of reading and a lot of biographic information. That was really important, but not very gripping material. So I literally thought there was no one awake to do the secret word. Yes, she's fine. She's fine. My daughter's, this is my youngest. She's having problems with her gallbladder, and she's trying to avoid surgery, but she has these flare-ups that are really bad. So, but she's fine. Thank you for asking. By the way, keep me and my family in your prayers and my prayers. They are in my prayers, but I appreciate it. Just lots of things going on here. Reason Belief is in the house. Yes, Reason, on your way to work, I take it. Hope you're doing well. It's always good to see Reason. By the way, show some love to his channel. He's a friend of this channel. Go there and give him some likes and things like that. Share the love. You need to do a better way to contact you during stream if that happens. You know, James, I was actually thinking about that, and I saw your email as well. Yeah, I'm going to work out something like that. Appreciate it. Yeah, awesome. Thomas Aquinas, yes, very important historic figure. Very important saint. One of the greatest minds in the church. It's fun to have a debate. Who would you want in your theological corner? Augustine or Aquinas? It's amazing, amazing person. Both of them are. And if you're interested in Augustine, we did a stream on Augustine. So, yes, he is. Truly amazing guy. And he wrote so much in such a short life. It's truly amazing. Let's see. Both. Yeah, I know. Why choose? Right? Why choose? But it would be fun. You know, it's one of those things where they're so evenly matched. If you had to do that, what would you do? I don't know who I'd pick. Like if you were in a debate and you could have a wingman, would it be Aquinas or Augustine? And they're so different too. Augustine is so synthetic in his understanding, where Aquinas is so systematic. I don't know. I don't know how you would choose. So I think James and Janice, you're absolutely right. Why choose? Just take them both. So anyway, so last chill stream, we went through the bio, talked about Jerome's life, which is quite important. We went over Hebrew Verite, which actually I want to recap today. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I really should recap Hebrew Verite because it's so instrumental in understanding his prefaces. And I'm trying to find a slide. I think I could have done these slides a little better too. And then we'll get into the preface themselves and we'll tear them apart. He's got a lot of prefaces. He has a lot of commentary. And we're going to dig through it all because we're nerds. That's what we do here on Apocrypha Apocalypse. So, by the way, if you could just take a second and hit that like button, appreciate that. And also, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing and doing all that stuff as well. Hey, this is a fun fact by Hollywood Big Boss. In my confirmation name, I kept bouncing between Jerome and Ignatius of Antioch. Yeah, that's another tough decision, right? Ignatius won out because I thought I may argue like Jerome. Ignatius proved the Catholic Church is, oh boy, leaving us on a cliffhanger there, is the church that Jesus started and his apostles and disciples. Also couldn't agree with Jerome on the canon during his 15 years of Hebrew truth. Yeah, those are good. Yeah, you could do that. Ignatius of Antioch. Man, what a precious witness and a holy man. You know, Ignatius also is a martyr, right? Unlike Jerome. Well, they're both martyrs. Actually, all Christians are martyrs. It's just a question if you're a wet or a dry martyr. And Ignatius was a wet martyr. Jerome was dry martyr. Yeah, I think I'd probably choose as well, Hollywood Big Boss. Though no offense to Saint Jerome, who's an awesome, really truly an awesome saint. But I had to give the nod to Ignatius, I think. By the way, if anybody has any questions in the chat room, I could probably handle it. I am more awake today, and I actually hit the right button this morning. So I think we're good. Why don't we get to the material? And we'll talk a little bit about Jerome's Hebrew Verite, and then we'll jump into the material. Because Hebrew Verite is the issue. In fact, at the team stream yesterday, the first comment to come out of this non-Catholic's mouth was, or chat room, I should say, was basically saying the church is wrong because Jerome says the Deuterocanon's false. That was his argument, which of course turns Jerome into a kind of super pope who could determine what is and what isn't the word of God. I don't think he meant to do that. So he threw down his Jerome card. I threw down an Augustine card. And I said, well, Augustine says the Deuterocanon is canonical and confirmed doctrine. It's inspired. And so you have your Jerome card. I have my Augustine card. How do we decide? Well, we have to look at how they came up with their conclusions. Augustine, as you guys know in the chill streams, anchored his decision on church history, apostolic tradition, ultimately what was the deposit of faith left by Jesus and the apostles. Jerome went with Hebrew Verite, which has been disproven by the Dead Sea Scrolls. So my Augustine card wins. That's how I addressed it. It's like the game of war that you play with a deck of cards. And I think that's really the point is the entire, the reformers almost uniformly appealed to Jerome as their reason for rejecting the Deuterocanon. And Jerome fails. He based Hebrew verite on an error that was probably not his own fault, but probably was something that at that time I think would be a very, very good theory. But he went against the church. He went against the common usage of the church, and he opted for his theory of Hebrew verite. And the church, when it reaffirmed the canon, didn't know Jerome's theory was wrong per se, not because of his idea of manuscript tradition, but they knew it was wrong because he's going against the church. He's going against the consensus. He's going against how these books were always understood to be in the church. So they knew he was wrong. They couldn't prove it until the 1940s. Now we can prove it. So Jerome is really off the table, but the problem is the reformers all hitched their carts to Jerome. So when Jerome falls, the Protestant canon falls. And if the Protestant canon falls, where do you go to establish the Protestant canon? Hence the problem. And so let's talk a little bit about Hebrew verite and why it fell. I'm just noticing there's some chats here. I'm just going to pull them out without reading them. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'm just trying to find out where I left off. Sorry, guys. I'm going to give you guys some extra love today in the chat room because of yesterday, or I keep saying yesterday, last chill stream. If I ever had to make a team stream with you and William, it'd be difficult deciding which chat to stay in. Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. Jerome did a lot of good work, which is true. He did. And but a lot of times his stubbornness got in the way. It's bad when North Africa has to hold two councils reinforcing 73 book canon. Yeah. I'm not sure. It's not like they didn't think Hippo Regius was important. It was kind of like, I went over it in the chill stream I did on North African councils, right? The reason why there's so many that address the canon is, well, Hippo Regius does it, and then Carthage reaffirms Hippo Regius, so it does it, reaffirms it, and then all of the canons are collected in 419, so it reaffirms it. But it's not so much like it didn't stick. It was more just an accident of history, I think. But an accident that I think makes the case even stronger because these councils with different people, different bishops around the world, large councils in North Africa, although local, all affirm the same thing. Augustine wins against Jerome. I think so. Like if I'm doing a game of war and I have patristics in my deck, I would lay an Augustine to overcome a Jerome. Protestants treating the fathers as if they're axioms. Yeah, that's true. It's really, there's so much, the fathers are so complex that it's easy to oversimplify them. You almost have to. Like even my assessment was pretty oversimplified. They picked the weak link. Yeah, they did. But at the time in the Middle Ages, he was the link. He was the ace of spades, they thought, in the deck, so to speak, the trump card. In fact, they used him as a trump card to overrule everything, including the church law in regards to the canon. And then it turns out that his exaggerated prominence in the Middle Ages eventually died down and is what it is today. There's nothing left to hang on to. Agree 100% that the Dead Sea Scrolls destroyed Jerome's Hebrew verite position. Even worse, if he saw how the rabbis have continued to edit the Old Testament He would have been horrified. I think he actually knew about that. There are like little clues here and there that, in fact, I think it's in the fact that they excised Judith, I think it is, from this preface that we will eventually get to. I think I think he knew that there was stuff going on. Just popped in, say goodnight, in case I nod off. Awesome. Better than melatonin. Thank you. Yeah, I should use that as a slogan. Come to the chill streams. It's better than melatonin. Okay, let's talk about Hebrew truth. We catch a glimpse of this. Actually, like I said, I wasn't planning on doing a summary, so I don't know if I have the right slides up. Yeah, I think this kind of encapsulates Hebrew Veritates in its preface to Ezra. It says, if anyone is to oppose us on the basis of the Septuagint translation, whose very variety of text indicates that its copies are corrupted and damaged, nor is it by any means be claimed that what is diverse is true. And I think that really encapsulates his view of Hebrew Verite. Jerome was a very rare Christian in the 4th century in that he knew Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and a little bit of Aramaic. He actually was able to read Aramaic. He just couldn't read it out loud. And that put him in a unique position to translate the Bible. And Pope Damasus realized that, and he tapped him to revise the Gospels. And then later, Jerome just keeps going. And his idea of Hebrew Verite is basically encapsulated this, that when he's looking at the landscape of manuscripts out there available to him, he's looking at Origen's Hexapla, and he sees the Hebrew in the first column, and he sees and the Greek transliteration in second. He sees a bunch of Greek translations. He sees the Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotian, Septuagint, right? And he knows that the rabbi friends have only one Hebrew text. And he looks around at the Christians and he sees all these different Hebrew texts, and Jews too, all these different Greek texts. And some of the Greek text, like the Aquila, the Aquila, is very literal Greek translation of the Hebrew, what becomes the Masoretic text, okay? And so he reasons that since the Hebrew text, there's only one Hebrew text in existence, and there's such a variety of Greek translations in existence, and even some of these Greek translations have variants and so on. He reasons that the Hebrew text must be a direct descendant of the original, and that all these Greek texts are just loose translations of that one Hebrew original. Hence the idea of Hebrew truth or Hebrew verite. Because as he says here, what is diverse, by no means can he claim that what is diverse is true, right? Because truth has a kind of unity to it, while diversity shows that there's some falsity mixed in, right? Or so he was thinking. So one manuscript goes back to the original, the Hebrew manuscript. All these Greek, the Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotian, Septuagint, are just better to poor, good to poor translations of that one Hebrew text. And so he wants to go back to the Hebrew because he thinks that is the only genuine, authentic witness of the original inspired text, right? And here's a picture of like what the Origen's Hexapla would probably look like, right? And so basically, I'm just going to skip through here. Basically, on the right, you have Hebrew Verite. And again, if you are in the shoes of the 4th century Christians and you hear this theory of Jerome, you can't argue with it. There is only one Hebrew text that the rabbis have, and there are a number of Greek texts in circulation, both by Jews and Christians. So that seems perfectly logical, right? Well, yeah, there was no way to prove it was wrong, at least, until we get to the 1940s with the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1940s, we discover that the situation in the first century was not the same situation in the fourth, that there wasn't just one Hebrew text, but there seems to be a variety of Hebrew text in circulation in the first century, and that one text was selected from the multitude, and that became the normative text for Rabbinic Judaism, as we have argued on this channel. And the other text just stopped being copied. And so they're just lost to history, buried in the sand or put in jars in caves. So when we discovered the jars in the caves, we find out, hey, look it, there is several, I guess you could say, versions of the Hebrew text. There's variations. It wasn't stabilized, although there was a move to stabilize it along a particular text tradition that was eventually accepted, right? But there's a variety. The other thing we discovered at the Dead Sea Scrolls is that while Theodotion, Symmachus, Aquila, and perhaps others, all were various, literal to loose translations of the same text. And by the way, if you look at this chart here, you see the MT is a descendant of that text that was translated. The Septuagint, however, at least in some parts, appears to be a very literal translation of a lost Hebrew text tradition. Again, in some parts of the Septuagint, not all. And so the Septuagint isn't a loosey-goosey, filled with errors like Jerome believed, translation of what becomes the MT. Rather, it's actually, in some places, a very good witness of an even earlier text tradition that is now lost. So what Jerome was essentially doing was pitting one text tradition against another. And in fact, he did so that one would co-opt another. Now, again, he didn't do this consciously. He didn't know about it. He was just operating on Hebrew verite, and that's what he did. Okay? So that's Hebrew verite. That's Hebrew truth. And that's why it's wrong, right? And as you can see, the textual transmission of the Old Testament is much more complex. So whatever is in the Hebrew text is true. Whatever is not in the Hebrew text is spurious or not authentic, not genuine, an add-on, or something like that. So you have to think about it in terms of like textual critical theory rather than canonical theory. Now, the implications of Hebrew verite with the canon is obvious, right? Because I don't know, should I get into this or not? As we've argued on this channel, sorry. Like I said, I wasn't planning on doing this. Anyway, as we've argued on this channel, we believe that the Christians in the first century received the canon of the Old Testament as part of the deposit of faith handed on by Jesus and the apostles. Okay. So the Christian canon is first century. Later in the second Christian century, Rabbinic Judaism forms from the multitude of different Judaisms that existed after the destruction of the temple, and I would say before the Bar Kokhba revolt. There's this adoption of a standard Hebrew text from among several texts. And the rabbis used as their normative text, they make the Aquila translation, which is a very hyper-literal translation of that text, and that becomes the single text that Jerome receives. right? But the Christian canon differs, right? The rabbinic text is more restrictive, it excludes these books, where the Christian canon accepts these books. Now, when you fast forward to the 4th century with Jerome, when he goes to Hebrew Verite, he's actually, now there's canonical implications to Hebrew Verite because the Deuterocanon is not part of the normative text selected in the 2nd Christian century. It's not there in Hebrew, although he was aware of Hebrew 1st Maccabees. He was aware that there were Aramaic versions of Tobit and Judith, but it wasn't part of that normative text tradition of the rabbis, so Jerome rejected it. So there's canonical implications for Hebrew Verite, very big ones. And as you can probably figure out, by Jerome doing this, he is going against the church, right? This is a unique position in the church. We only see hints of this position earlier on, like with Africanus and his dialogue with Origen, and maybe some others indirectly. But he's the one that actually says, if it's not in Hebrew, it's Apocrypha. The first Christians who ever assigned the Deuterocanon to the Apocrypha. So he's kind of the Grinch that stole the Deuterocanon. Okay. Now, you would expect there would be pushback. And indeed, as we learn in these prophecies, Jerome knew there would be pushback. In fact, he was already encountering pushback by using Hebrew Verite and coming up with a Latin translation that differs from the Old Latin. By the way, the Old Latin was a translation of the Septuagint, and it had the deuterocanonical books in it. So these prefaces is really his preemptive strike against his opponents. He knew how important it is to get your argument out first, ahead of criticism, and the prefaces was the means by which he could do that. He could tell his friends, look, there's going to be detractors. Here's why I did what I did. And this is kind of like where I stand. I could do no other, right? Let's see. Got a question here. I want to go before let's tackle this before we begin. The prefaces, I might have mentioned this before, but there's quite a bit of evidence that Synecticus and Vaticanus are forgeries. Would you be considering looking into this in depth? No, I don't think so. Just because the canon is, I don't know if that would be relevant. And it looks like that would require some specialized study that I haven't done. Maybe in the future I will. Local, was it 2 million? Maybe in the future I will, but as of right now, I'm not planning on looking at the codices in depth. Although I probably should. Came late, no problem, Vince Cruz. 5202. Appreciate that you're here. My understanding is the Greek Septuagint LXX was translated from very, very early manuscripts that were centuries before medieval. Yes, that's what I just said. Yep. So you actually anticipated what I was just saying about Hebrew Verite. So at least some sections of the Septuagint. You have to be careful. Septuagint is eclectic. There's different hands that translated Septuagint. It's not all one translator, and it's not all one source text. But some of the text, at least we could see at Qumran, are actually very early and actually kind of literal. Okay, so to look at the prefaces, we have to look at how Jerome wrote, or when Jerome wrote these prefaces, because he didn't sit down and write he didn't translate the entire Bible in one sitting. Let's put it that way. The Vulgate is dispersed in piecemeal. And it's eventually later collected into what we call the Vulgate. And by the way, the Vulgate, the name Vulgate is itself very slippery. It wasn't called a Vulgate. Actually, I think the Septuagint was called a Vulgate. And then the Old Latin's the Vulgate. Vulgate just means vulgar or popular. That's all. So looking at this chronologically, he starts off by revising the Old Latin Gospels, as Pope Damasus commissioned them to do, and those Gospels are included in the Vulgate. Then he revises the Old Latin Psalter, and this revision's lost. Then he translates the Psalms based on the Greek Septuagint. This is known as the Gallican Psalms, Psalter. Then he wrote commentary, Ephesians, Galatians, Philemon, Titus, translates Job, Chronicles, and the books of Solomon from the Septuagint. So this is prior to his conviction of Hebrew verite. Then the most important transition is in 382 or thereabouts, where he begins to use Hebrew verite, and he translates Samuel and Kings. This is the first prologue we're going to look at, the prologue to the books of Kings. He does this directly from his Hebrew text, and the translations included later in the Vulgate. Okay. Then he makes a Hebrew translation of the Psalms, he makes a Latin translation of the Hebrew Psalms. Then he tackles Job from Hebrew, and that's included in the Vulgate. Then a translation of Ezra and Nehemiah from Hebrew. This is in the Vulgate. Then a translation of the books of Solomon from Hebrew in the Vulgate. And by the way, when I say then, realize dating is very loosey-goosey. And that's part of the problem of when we talk about him vacating Hebrew verite later in his life. A lot depends on how you date the various material, and it's very difficult to date. So this is what scholars kind of think the order was. So take it with a big grain of salt. This may be incorrect. But anyway, I just want to give you an idea that what he's doing is his patrons are saying, hey, can you translate these books? We'll send scribes to you, but we really want you to do this for us. And so he writes a preface, he translates the books, and he sends it back to his patrons. And his patrons are all over the place. So some of these, so it goes to one place and he has a preface. He has another place that has a preface. It's being scattered all over the place. Okay. Then, like I said, eventually after Jerome's death, these become collected and they make up the core of what becomes the Vulgate. Actually, the Vulgate we have today also has Old Latin that wasn't touched by Jerome. So it's eclectic. It's got a whole bunch of different things. But this is why Jerome's view gets out, and it's like church law is very difficult to rein it in. It's because the Vulgate is all over the place, and these prefaces are being copied and distributed all over the place. It's kind of like the printing press before the printing press, right? It's hard to kind of put a lid on this genie in the bottle. So he has all these critical remarks about his canon and Hebrew verite in circulation. And notice all of this is taking place right when the North African councils are starting to meet. So he kind of does get his word out before his opponents. And that's why, even though the church spoke to the canon of Scripture, Jerome's opinion still is in circulation. So, spoiler alert, that's what we're going to be finding in later chill streams. Then he does his apology to Rufinus. I'm just including that just so you get an idea of how these things all fit together. Then he translates the Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and Esther. These are all from Hebrew, and they're included in the Vulgate. And then near the end of his translation career, we have Tobit, Judith, and I think Jonah. I didn't include it here, but I think that's kind of how this all unfolds chronologically. Yeah, let's see. So local says, all good. Just thought bring it up. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm always open for ideas. Nothing against the Apocrypha, by the way, just looking for the truth. And there are many that doubt the authenticity to defend or debunk. Yeah, cool. Well, you're in the right place because you're not going to hear this perspective anywhere. Or if you do, it's going to be not as in-depth any place. And with the chat room like this, we're going to, I think we have an outstanding channel. In the Psalms, James Day says, of the Vulgate is based on the Greek or the Hebrew. I believe the Hebrew. The Gallican Psalter, was not included in the Septuagint, although it's apparently a very, very beautiful Latin translation of the Greek. And so it did circulate outside the Vulgate. Okay, so as I said, the prologue to the books of Kings. This is so important, guys. Like I said, this appears to be the first preface that he writes, the first group of books that he distributes. I got the English translation from BibleResearcher.com. I think it's serviceable. There's other translations. There's one in Mead and Gallagher, Canon list book, but I opted for this simply because it's out there and it's serviceable. It's fine. Because I don't think we really need to get into the nitty-gritty of Latin. When we do, I will show you primary source material or at least some critical text and things like that. Okay, so let's read the prefaces together and make comments. Actually, the beginning of the preface is, I'm going to skip over some stuff simply because it's just too tedious to go over all of this. He begins, quote, that the Hebrews have 22 letters is testified also by the Syrian and Chaldean languages. Chaldean, by the way, is Aramaic, which for the most part correspond to the Hebrew. For they have 22 elementary sounds, which are produced or pronounced in the same way, but are written differently. The Samaritans also write the Pentateuch of Moses with just the same number of letters, differing only in the shape and points of the letters. And it is certain that Esdras, the scribe and teacher of the law, after the capture of Jerusalem and the restoration of the temple of Zerubbabel, invented other letters, which we use now, but up until the time of the Samaritans and the Hebrew characters were the same. Then in the book of Numbers, moreover, we have the census of the Levites and priests. The same total is presented mystically, that is 22 letters. And we find the four-lettered name of the Lord Tetragrammaton for certain Greek books is written to this day in the ancient letters. That's interesting. Okay. So basically, he's going into the biblical mystical background of 22 books. Okay. So the 37th Psalm, moreover, 111th, the 112th, the 119th, and the 145th, although they're written in different meters, are all composed as acrostics according to an alphabet of the same number of letters. Lamentations of Jeremiah and his prayer and Proverbs of Solomon also, towards the end, from the piece where it reads, "Who will find a steadfast woman?" are instances of the same number of letters forming the division into sections. So he's just establishing that there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And then he talks about double letters in the Hebrew alphabet, which is kind of interesting. Furthermore, there are 5 double letters, this Kaf, Mem, Nun, Fe, and Sade, for at the beginning and in the middle of the words, they are written one way, but at the end, another way, which is true. Whence it happens that by most people, 5 of the books are reckoned as double. So he thinks the double letters correspond to why certain books are combined in the rabbinic canon. Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Jeremiah with Kenuth, i.e., his Lamentations. So notice he combines Jeremiah and Lamentations together. As then, there are 22 elementary characters by which are written in Hebrew all we say, and the human voice is comprehended within the limits. So we reckon 22 books by which, as the alphabet of the doctrine of God, a righteous man is instructed in tender infancy, as it were, while still at the breast, which actually kind of echoes Josephus a little bit. Okay, so he knows this. There's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 books. Okay. And we saw this before, right, with Origen and Athanasius and others. And this is Jewish tradition, right? That it seems like within Jewish mysticism, the 22 letters correspond to 22 books, which correspond to the Rabbinic Bible. I believe so, James. I believe so, but I could be wrong. Okay. So then he continues to name what are those 22 books that correspond to the 22 letters in the Rabbinic Bible. And he goes on. I'm not going to read all this. Like Origen, he gives the Hebrew name and the name as it is in Latin. So you have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And that's the law. Second class is composed of prophets. And they begin with Jesus, the son of Nave, which is among them called Joshua ben Nun. And then it continues. It talks about Judges, Ruth, First and Second Kings, Third and Fourth Kings. That is Samuel and Kings. And then it continues. And then it says Sixth Jeremiah. Now notice here, he counts Jeremiah, but we know that Jeremiah is combined with Lamentations, but there's no list of Lamentations. And the reason for that is in list, Jeremiah is often understood to be a collection of writings. Okay. And this is true not only with Jerome, but other early church fathers as well. Hence the whole, I don't know what you would call it, the whole tempest in a teapot that people stir up about the North African councils just affirming Jeremiah and supposedly of rejecting Baruch in the epistle. So even Jerome will list Jeremiah alone, even though he believes it's combined with Lamentations. Continuing on, Ezekiel and the 12 minor prophets. And then he says the third class belong to the Hagiographa, of which the first book is Job. And then Psalms, Proverbs, which now, I didn't highlight this, but put in your back pocket, Proverbs, which they call parables. Okay. That's going to come up in a little bit. So Proverbs is called parables. Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Daniel. Daniel, by the way, even though it's Daniel the prophet, it's put in the writings. And we'll see that when we talk in this preface to the book of Daniel. And then you have Chronicles, which is called First and Second Parapoliponon. And the eighth is Ezra, which is likewise divided amongst the Greeks and Latin into two books. And I'll just stop right there because that's really important. Again, you have anti-Catholics out there, and even some scholars, who insist that the North African councils affirmed Greek Esdras and Ezra Nehemiah, and then claim that the Council of Trent, by affirming only Ezra and Nehemiah, has excluded a book that was affirmed in the North African councils, even though it was the direct intention of Trent to basically reaffirm the same books. Okay. So David Zavaros did an outstanding series, guys. I know I keep pointing you to it, but I don't want to go through all the details about this. But he just type in Greek Ezra or Baruch and watch that series. He does a great job going through this. But this is important because the North African Councils says Esdras Duo Libri, 2 books. And what are those 2 books? Is it Greek Ezra and Ezra and Nehemiah, or is it canonical Ezra and Nehemiah? Are those the 2 books? Well, the Hebrews combined them into 1 book. So it's Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Because they wanted to come up with a 22 book count. But what Jerome says here is that among the Greeks and Latins, so he's talking about Christians, Ezra is actually divided into 2, meaning Ezra is a separate book from Nehemiah. And that is what the North African councils say when they say 2 books Ezra. It's canonical Ezra and Nehemiah, because the Greeks and the Latins, as Jerome says here, separated into 2 books. Now, before the show, I wanted to see what Mead and Gallagher say about this, as we do on this channel. And so here is a clip from Mead and Gallagher's book, The Biblical Canon List of Early Christianity, put out by Oxford University Press. It's generally a decent work, but you'll see things like this because you can tell the authors really, really want to affirm the Protestant canon. They really do. And when facts go against that, then they kind of massage their explanation of it. So on the top, that's the translation. As you can see, it's pretty much the same as what we went over, which is also itself divided into 2 books, similarly among Greek and Latin. And he knows footnote 132. So here is footnote 132. Me and Gallagher say, quote, Jerome seems to be saying that the book that the Jews call Ezra, equal Ezra and Nehemiah in English Bibles, was sometimes divided by Greeks into 2 books. Now, reread the top part. Does he seem to be saying this, or does he actually say it? 8th Ezra, which is also itself divided into 2 books, similarly among the Greeks and Latins. I don't know why he says Jerome seems to be saying this. He is saying this. So what you have here is historic proof that Ezra and Nehemiah was divided by Greeks and Latin, right? Jerome tells us this. So if it's not proof, it's certainly a strong indication that this is a custom amongst the Greeks and Latins. Now, then it continues in footnote 132, quote, there is barely any evidence to confirm this assertion. Now, I highlighted the word barely. So Mead and Gallagher say, yeah, there is evidence, but just not a lot. So what's the point? Right? So he makes a very strong assertion in the 4th century that such is the case, and there seems to be evidence that would confirm it. Okay, not a lot of evidence, but there seems to be some. Maybe it's dubious evidence. So what's the objection, right? Why do we have to argue about this? It seems like he's telling the truth, right? At least we can look in history and see evidence of this elsewhere. And David Zavaros, I think, does in his stream. The Greeks certainly did talk about the 2 books of Esdras, but these included the literal Greek translation of our canonical Ezra, 2nd Ezra, and another Greek book, which is considered apocryphal, which combines material from Ezra, material from Nehemiah, and then the Chronicles, namely Greek Ezra. Jerome surely does not intend to include 1st Ezra in the canon here, and he never translated 1st Ezra. His purpose regarding, he perhaps regarded it as a variant of Ezra and Nehemiah. See his preface. And we're going to look at that preface too. But I wanted to point this out, though. It's like, this is a great indication where you can tell the authors already have a predetermined view of what the canon ought to be, And then when you run into little bumps like this, it's like, well, it seems he sort of suggests, there's kind of barely some evidence. Yeah, I'll just leave it like that. Anyway, moving on. Oh, this is fun, isn't it, guys? All right, moving on in the preface. So there are also 22 books of the Old Law. That is 5 of Moses, 8 of the prophets, 9 of the Hagiographa. Though some include Ruth and Kenuth, which is Lamentations, amongst the Hagiographa, which is kind of interesting. Lamentations would be separate from Jeremiah and placed in the Hagiographa. I don't know what to say about that. And think these books ought to be reckoned separately. They should thus have 24 books of the ancient law. So he moves from 22 books of the Hebrew alphabet to 24 books, depending on how you combine certain books. Okay. And the Apocalypse of John represents as 24 elders who adored the Lamb and offer their crowns with lower visage, while in their presence stand the 4 living creatures with eyes before and behind, that is, looking the past and the future, and an unwearied voice crying, Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty, who was and is and will be. So here he links 24 books with the book of Revelation. And in a previous stream, actually, I don't remember if we did it in a previous stream. I think we did. There's actually someone who before him makes the same connection, although they interpret it a bit differently. Lino says, would love to see a team stream with you. David and William, deep dive into Protestant historical revisionism, Deuterocanon, just in general. Yeah, we've kind of done that before, but I'm sure we will. Lately, we've been trying to challenge people to come on and defend the Protestant canon, but maybe we will. It's actually extremely complex, as you can imagine, because Protestantism isn't monolithic, certainly not even at its beginning. So there's lots of different views. Okay, moving on. Now we're getting into the most important part for us, but it's all important. He says, this preface to the scriptures may serve as a helmeted, i.e. defensive, introduction to all the books which we turn from Hebrew into Latin, so that you may be assured that what is outside of them must be placed aside among the apocryphal writings. So here, guys, there's a couple of very important points to note. First, Jerome knew that Hebrew verite and its canonical implications is going to ruffle a lot of feathers. And that's why he styles his very first prologue, his very first preface, as being a helmeted preface. That is, it is armor to protect him. That essentially is a co-optive strike against his opponents. Okay. Even though it's styled defensive, it really is offensive. I mean, he's preparing himself for combat with critics. The second thing to note here is Hebrew verite becomes a criteria for the canon. And like we said, his Hebrew verite is kind of like, it's more like textual criticism, where if it's not in the Hebrew, it's spurious. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. So only the Hebrew is the authentic text. So whatever is not there, whether it be extra words or extra books, that becomes the percussion bed, right, of the canon. So whatever is in the Hebrew is affirmed. Whatever is not in the Hebrew is cut off. Now, this might sound very familiar to you guys who have been watching chill streams. And if We said early on, amongst the very earliest chill streams I ever did, when we're working chronologically through this, way back in the day of Akiba, when the rabbis selected their normative text, this appears to be the same mode that Jerome is doing, because there were books that sacredness were doubted. There were proto-canonical books that some Jews doubted was sacred, such as it could be Proverbs, it could be most likely Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Esther, maybe more. So those books were in that selected standardized Hebrew text. So Akiba affirmed their sacredness. It becomes the Procrustean bed for them. And there were books that Jews accepted as sacred, like Sirach and perhaps other books. Those books he basically cuts off. He says they're outside books because they're not part of the adopted normative text. Jerome is doing essentially the same way, unwittingly. Because like I said, all those other texts cease to be copied. Actually, the Deuterocanon continues to be copied within Rabbinic Judaism, interesting enough. But those other Hebrew texts disappear, and Jerome finds himself with a single Hebrew text, which he deems to be the authentic one, identical to the original. That gives him reason to cut off everything else, just like Akiba did in the second Christian century. And it's funny because he doesn't like Akiba, obviously. He's aware of him. He doesn't like him. Okay, so here we have, that's basically the epicenter of his thought right now. So he goes on. He says, wisdom, therefore, which generally bears the name of Solomon, and the book of Jesus, the son of Sirach, and Judith, and Tobias, and the shepherd of Hermas, are not in the canon. Okay, so they're not in the Hebrew text. So according to Jerome, they're not in the canon. Now, of course, Wisdom of Solomon is a Greek text, originally written in Greek. Sirach, actually, he says, is Hebrew. He's aware of a Hebrew text of Sirach. And later we'll notice it's called parables, just like Proverbs. And Judith and Tobias are Aramaic. Now, guys, actually, I talked to Dr. David after the show yesterday. This one's curious. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it because I don't know what the answer is. Why in the world does Jerome include the shepherd of Hermas? This doesn't make any sense to me. And like I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If anybody knows this, why he does this, Mead and Gallagher don't comment on this. And I'm not aware of anybody commenting on it, although it is noted. The shepherd of Hermas, as you guys know, is an apostolic father. It's a Christian text, and very explicitly Christian at that. Why is that part of the Apocrypha of the Old Testament? I have no idea. So again, guys, since you guys are kind of like a think tank, you're doing your own research and so on, anybody come up with something, let me know. I'd love to hear your opinion. I'm scratching my head. I have no idea why shepherd's there. The other thing is First Maccabees. The first book of Maccabees is found in Hebrew and the second in Greek. That's interesting, right? So Origen was aware of Hebrew Maccabees, First Maccabees. He supplies the name of it, Sarbat Semnil, in his preface to the book of Psalms. But that's all we know about it. Jerome here says he's aware of the Hebrew text as well. So apparently Rabbinic Judaism is still copying First Maccabees in Hebrew and apparently reading it as well. But the second is Greek, as he says, which could be proved from its very style. And scholars today would affirm that. Second Maccabees and Wisdom were originally written in Greek. Although these things are thus, I beseech you, my reader, do not think of my labors are intended to disparage the ancients, i.e. the translations of the older versions. For the service of the tabernacle of God, each one offers what he can, some gold and silver and precious stones, others linen and blue and purple and scarlet. And you shall do well if we offer skins and goat hair in Exodus 25. Yet the apostle pronounces our more contemptible things more necessary than others, 1 Corinthians 12:22. Accordingly, the beauty of the tabernacle as a whole and in several kinds, the ornaments of the church, present and future, was covered with skins and goat hair cloths, and the heat of the sun and the injurious rain were warded off by those things which are less account. So basically he's saying, yeah, it's the Apocrypha is part of the Bible, like goat skins are part of the tabernacle, and they're just lesser things. That's my take on it. You guys could take your own take on it. Although these things are thus, I beseech you, my reader. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. First read then, my Samuel and Kings. Mine, I say mine. For whatever by diligent translation and by anxious emendation we have learned and made our own is ours. And when you understand something of which you were before ignorant, reckon me as a translator if you are grateful, or a paraphraser if ungrateful, although I am not in the least conscious of having deviated from the Hebrew original. Notice the Hebrew is the inspired original for Jerome. And also notice that he takes this very personally, right? He was aware that the tax on his translation is a tax on him personally. At all events, if you are incredulous, read the Greek and Latin manuscripts and compare them with these, my poor efforts of mine. And whatever you see they disagree, ask some Hebrew in whom you have more faith. And if he can confirm our view, I suppose you will not think him a soothsayer, or suppose that he and I have, in rendering the same passage, divined alike. That's an interesting turn of phrase by Jerome, right? So he's saying, look, okay, if you have problems with my translation, look at the Septuagint, look at Aquila, look at the Old Latin, compare them. And where you see the Septuagint and Old Latin differ from my translation, then ask a rabbi, ask a Jew who knows Hebrew, in which you have more faith. Ask him to say what is in the Hebrew. And basically, and he says that you'll find out that they'll say exactly the same thing I say. But what I want to call attention, and I think it's kind of interesting, this sounds a lot like the miracle of the translation of the Septuagint as proposed by the letter of Aristeas, right? The Septuagint, supposedly had these 70 translators that translated the Torah, and they all agree word for word. Jerome is kind of riffing off that. It's kind of funny. He's like, hey, compare my Vulgate, and you'll see that, a Jewish translator and myself, it's almost like we miraculously say the same thing. Kind of like the Septuagint. Okay, continuing. But I ask you, handmaidens of Christ, who anoint the head of your reclining Lord, and with the most precious myrrh of faith, who by no means seek the Savior in the tomb, but for whom Christ has long since ascended to the Father, I beg you to confront with the shields of your prayers the dogs who bark and rage against me with rabid mouths, and who go about the city and think themselves learned, as if they disparage others. Knowing my loneliness, I always remember what you are told. I said, I will take heed of my ways, that I offend not in my tongue. I have set the guard upon my mouth, while the sinner standeth against me. I became dumb and was humble, and kept silent from good words. Quoting Psalm. Guys, compare Jerome to Augustine. Oh, sorry. Augustine on Christian doctrine, right? When he gives the canon. He gives the canon, Jerome gives his canon. Did Augustine ever say or speak of dogs that are going to speak against his canon? Did he ever instruct his students that are reading, beware, there's going to be people out there that's going to gainsay me, that think they're really smart, and they're going to oppose what I'm teaching in my on Christian doctrine about the canon? No, it's the exact opposite, right? Augustine is basically appealing to the general consensus of the church, right? He says, look around, the greater number of churches, especially those that have were worthy of a seat of apostle or to receive letters and to receive letters. It's based on church history. He assumes everybody's going to agree with his canon. And he lists in his canon the deuterocanonical books. Now, look at Jerome in his preface to the books of Kings that we just read. Do you find that same kind of expectation? No. Jerome clearly knows he's bucking the trend. He is doing something that's unique, that's very eclectic, it's very unprecedented, that there's going to be huge pushback. And he wrote the preface in order to do a preemptive strike, basically, and defend his work before the detractors will start attacking him. And like I said at the beginning of the program, that's what I said to that person in the chat room yesterday when they threw out the Jerome card, right? It's night and day. Augustine is rooted in church history because he's trying to determine what exactly was that the deposit of faith that Christ and the apostles left to the church, where Jerome is working on his theory of Hebrew verite. And he knows that his conclusions about the canon is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, in addition to his translation. And just working through the helmeted prologue like we did today, I think that's obvious, right? That's obvious. So who are you going to trust, Augustine or Jerome? Who shows authentically what was the ancient church, the views of the ancient church? Is it Augustine or Jerome? The funny thing is the early reformers, I should have had a slide for this, but if you read John Calvin's work, Antidote to the Council of Trent, he basically says that he puts them both together and says there really is no decision. There's no difference really between the two. And therefore, let us opt for Jerome as the representative, and Rufinus, I think, as well, as the representative of antiquity. I should have put that in there. I wasn't thinking that I was going to take this tact at the end, but that would have been really interesting. It would have showed how basically we would pull John Calvin's pants down in regards to that remark, because he's totally wrong. Okay, with that being said, we are done with our presentation. We're going to go through the other prophecies as well and take our time. We're going to enjoy it. We're going to understand Jerome. And then we're going to go to usage and talk about the flip-flop. But those are all future chill streams. I hope you enjoyed today. And without further ado, let's go back to the comment section, if I could find the last comment I talked about. And by the way, if you have any questions, please throw it up there, or comments or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, so I'm just going to pick these up. Yes, this is about doing a team stream with William and David. We've done series on this. That would be something we'd have to prepare for, obviously. Maybe we could. I'm going to cover it in depth in chill streams, God willing, because I'm anticipating. What I want to do, go through the whole of church history. So we're at the 4th century. So maybe, I don't know, God willing, if I'm still around and you're still around and we're still doing this, maybe we'll get to the Protestant Reformation and we'll go through that in depth. That'll be a ton of fun. Um, and actually, I have a feeling that's going to be a lot quicker than you think, because when you get to the medieval ages, it's very difficult to get a hold of manuscripts and translations, especially. And there's not a lot available. So when we're going through after Damasus all the way till Luther, there's a couple of people that there's a lot of information on. We can do some pretty good analysis, but there's also a lot that we have practically nothing on. And so I think the chill streams are going to go really quick through the Middle Ages, but eventually we'll get there. We'll get there. But you want a team stream though? I don't know. I'd have to ask David and William, and I think it would be fun. I think that's a really good suggestion, Lino. Not much of a deep dive. Laugh out loud. Yeah. Question I have is, what was Jerome asked to do when he translated the Bible? We're going to get into that in a future stream. Was he a translator, or was he a translator, or the church translate what the church agrees on and makes up his own mind to do what it should be? Okay, I'll do my best to answer that. Now, I'm going to be looking at this more closely, so I might change my views. My impression is this: Pope Damasus was aware that the Old Latin translation of the scriptures, especially in the New Testament and the Gospels, was corrupted. That these different copies had, there's too much variety. Corruption had sneaked into the Latin. So he wanted to make a fresh revision of the Gospels from the Greek. And so he tapped Jerome to translate or revise the Old Latin in line with the Greek to clear up the text. Okay. So the initial project was for him to basically make a Latin replacement for the Old Latin of the Gospels. Then I believe that's Pope Damasus dies. Jerome goes from Rome to Bethlehem, as we saw in our biography that we did last show stream. When he's in the Holy Land, by the way, on the way there, he learns, gets to the Holy Land, he starts getting into developing this idea of Hebrew verite, probably largely because he's interacting with a lot of rabbis in the Holy Land, and they're doing what they did to Origen, mainly scoffing at him and making fun of him because he's appealing to texts that they don't accept. And so he comes up with Hebrew verite. And from that point on, he's doing the Psalter, right? And then he starts doing the Psalter in Hebrew, and he starts his own kind of project where he's getting into the Old Testament and translating the Old Testament text, largely through requests from his patrons. So it's very haphazard. It's not systematic translation. Now, was this authorized by the church? No, but there were bishops that were requesting him to do this. Okay. So going back to your question, was he a translator or the church? So, yeah, so what official status did it have? Certainly his Old Testament translation was not something the church authorized him to do, unless you mean by church individual bishops. Okay. So these are like commissioned work by bishops or by patrons of it, other patrons. And it's done piecemeal. And eventually what happens is people see, they see the value of the Vulgate. The value, I mean, it is valuable. Even with Hebrew verite is valuable. And so what happens is there was a period where the Old Latin and Jerome's translations are circulating around. We get to Gregory the Great. He basically wants to use both because, the Old Latin is the Old Latin. It's part of the text that has always been read in the Latin Church in North Africa and in Christianity in general. But he's also aware of Jerome's work, and he sees it as very valuable scholarship. And eventually what happens is those various translations of his is collected and made into what we call the Vulgate. And by the way, he doesn't translate all the books of the Bible, including the New Testament. He only revises certain areas of the New Testament. And there are some texts in that are brought in from the Old Latin into the Vulgate, so it's not entirely Jerome's. But that becomes kind of like the translation. And eventually in the Middle Ages, it was hanging around so much and used by so many people that the Council of Trent says that whenever there's a debate, a theological dispute or debate, that it's a safe translation to use because no one ever accused Jerome of heretical interpretations. So I hope that answers your question. So it does kind of have a quasi-authoritative stance in the church, but it was never like a project of the church. It was more of a private project, except for the revision of the Gospels. At least that's my take, and I could be wrong. So take that with a grain of salt. We Catholics use consensus of the fathers. Protestants use consensus of one father. A majority of one. Yes, indeed. And the funny thing is like there's a lot of umbrage, especially in the Reform camp, of this idea that no, church councils can't speak to the canon because that would make church councils above the scriptures, and nothing's above the word of God. But Jerome, apparently, somehow he doesn't fit into that particular system of thought. Apparently it's okay for one person to be above the word of God, but not the church, not a council of bishops. Yeah, James, I love the way you put it. You're an awesome person. I think you nailed it. St. Jerome was asked to revise the Latin translation of the Gospels and Psalms only. Yeah, I think so. That's why most Catholics become proficient in ecclesiastical Latin. Yeah, I wish I learned Latin in school. When I went to high school, I went to a Catholic high school. And the year before I got there, they had a mandatory Latin class, and they dropped it. And man, I wish I was born earlier, because not only do you have access to all the church writings, ecclesiastical writings in the West, but the whole patristic West, right? It's just so sad that I didn't do it. So I took German instead. Why? I don't know. Just seemed like a fun language to take. And I forgot most of my German, by the way, because it was the first class. Guys, it was surreal in high school. My first class to start the day was German, and it was taught by Schwester Anna, a nun. And part of her way she taught German was we would sing German songs. And a lot of the German songs that we learned were kind of like drinking songs. So if you could picture going to high school, Catholic high school, like 8 o'clock in the morning, hearing a bunch of students led by a nun singing German drinking songs. That was fun. God has a sense of humor. I'd be interested in seeing your diagnosis of Protestantism and its historical revisionism. I would too. But if I do that, and I know William and David feel the same way, we would really love to roll up our sleeves and make sure we get our facts straight and try to approach it as objectively as possible. Although we will have our own opinion, but we would want to do a good job doing it. And if you're asking for a team stream, that means we all got to prep, and that's why I think it'd be more difficult than it sounds. There's definitely cognitive dissonance when you're trying to be reconciled. Yes, indeed. My comment on Latin Catholics should be proficient in ecclesiastical Latin was referring to you saying that there isn't many translations. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, James. The thing is, how many people out there today want to read? I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that isn't translated in Latin. Would want to read a medieval theologian or something like that. Basically, just us. Basically, the chat room and myself. Good morning, Tuesday Joy. Glad you could join us. Thanks. That clears up a lot. Good. I appreciate that. Yeah, again, take it with a grain of salt. I'm still trying to get a handle on Jerome and the Vulgate and everything, but that's my understanding so far. I think it's pretty solid. And if I'm wrong, I'll be gladly corrected. In fact, I rejoice at being corrected because I don't want to teach things that are incorrect. Okay, it's just a yeah. So, okay, cool. I think we've reached the end of the program. And let's last call for questions. And by the way, as you're typing in, feverishly trying to get your question in before we end the chill stream, please take a second and do us a favor and hit that like button. Also, the alarm button if you want to be alerted for team streams and things like that. Also, subscribe if you can. If you haven't subscribed, we are really, really close to hitting another mark of 13.9K. We're only maybe about 30 short. So you could be the one to put us over the top. And that goes a long way, I think, to making this channel a little bit bigger and get a little bit more people on the channel. Also, consider being a member. We have a lot of fun. At least I have a ton of fun with our hangouts every Sunday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. We do a hangout with all the members and chat about whatever you want. We get into really cool discussions about everything, not just canon, but anything in the world. So consider being a member. You also get exclusive material like sneak peeks at the Canon 101 series we're doing and other things as well. And also, if you'd like, please support me on Patreon. My patrons have a huge benefit. They get free ebooks that actually is a lot more than what you donate on Patreon. You also get exclusive material like our members do, but you also get all the PowerPoints. So you get like today's PowerPoint, which is huge with all this information so that you can use it for your own study. You can use it for evangelism, stuff like that. It's a huge, huge, I think, bargain because on my Patreon website, just think about it. There's a database of the chill streams out there. So if you ever talk to somebody and they bring up Melito Sardis, bang, you got the slides. You got all the information you need. And I make that free to my patrons as a thank you for their support. But I don't want it to be a paywall. So if anyone out there wants a PDF of what I present here on the channel, I'll be glad to send it to you free of charge. Just contact me with the description and I think the info section of the channel, and let me know and I'll be glad to send it to you. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat room. So what is the secret word that we could flex to the world that you stayed awake during one of these chill streams? James Tay has selected the secret word, which is angel, because today's the feast of the angelic doctor. So, James, excellent job selecting the secret word, I may say. Yeah, there you go. So Tuesday Joy has, yes, you have all the slides. So put angel in the chat room, flex to the world that you stayed awake during one of my presentations, which is no small feat. As someone said in the chat room, this is better than melatonin. So, all right. Well, it's time for me to get out of here, go work out, get ready to prepare the material for the next chill stream, amongst other things. Keep me in your prayers, guys. I keep you in my prayers. Till next time, I'm Gary Michuta. I hope you have a fantastic day or a fantastic evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.